Opening a curtain and crumbling a wall, exploring diplomacy in Eastern Europe. The Berlin Wall, built in 1961, was a physical symbol of the division of democratic and communist ideologies between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Both countries explored new ways to institute their types of government onto other nations and used Berlin as an instrument to spread their political agendas. This and the lack of successful exchange and communications resulted in encountering two very different lifestyles for people on both sides of the wall. World War II ended in 1945 with the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union victorious. It was now up to these war allies to decide the future of a destroyed Europe. They decided to split Germany into 4 zones of occupation, one ruled by each of the 3 powers and one by France. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin also bargained for control over more of Europe to establish communism to the newly independent countries in exchange for assisting the United States in the Pacific. Winston Churchill wrote Franklin Roosevelt saying that the Soviet Union has become a danger to the free world. The political differences between the countries could only stay hidden for so long until they became a problem in communications that halted forward progress. This was the beginning of a long, bitter battle that pitted democracy versus communism, known as the Cold War.
Eventually, the 3 sectors that belonged to the United States, Great Britain, and France combined to form a democratic West Germany with a communist East Germany controlled by the Soviet Union. The United States wanted to rebuild Germany and supported a future reunification to prevent the Soviet Union from free and total control of Eastern Europe. The United States upheld a military presence in Europe long after the war was over, fearing that if they left there would be no way to prevent communism from spreading. Truman was determined to protect democracy at all costs. The Truman Doctrine was an American policy to stop Soviet imperialism by containing Soviet threats to Eastern European countries with financial aid and support. This policy led to the creation of the Marshall Plan, an American initiative to aid Western Europe. The goals of this plan were to rebuild war-devastated regions, modernize industry, create trading opportunities, and make Europe prosperous again. Communist countries such as the Soviet Union refused this help.
It became apparent that the economy in East Germany was just terrible. They had no pollution regulations. The economy was just unable to support its people well. They had a 3-cylinder car. That's about all they had. And when these people poured into West Berlin and saw the incredible economic productivity of the West, that alone meant that a number of them could never go back to thinking about communism, at least the communism they knew and grew up with.
Post-war peace was impossible. The opposing political views of Stalin and Truman led to the division of Eastern Europe. The Soviet Union created an Iron Curtain, a political, physical, and ideological barrier to seal itself and its communist Eastern and Central European neighbors from the Western Allies. Winston Churchill said, "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has ascended across the continent." Split into East and West sectors, the Berlin Wall would become a literal Iron Curtain. The Soviet Union's idea behind Communist Berlin was to create more communist countries on its western border to never be vulnerable to be attacked and invaded by the West. This caused tensions to rise that would eventually result in the construction of the infamous Berlin Wall. The Soviet blockade of Berlin was an attempt by the Soviet Union in 1948 to limit the ability of France, Great Britain, and the United States to travel to the east sector of Berlin by blocking all rail and road traffic to and from West Berlin. The Western powers retaliated by instituting an airlift that lasted nearly a year and delivered much-needed supplies and relief to West Berlin. This was the first major clash of the Cold War and foreshadowed future conflict over the city of Berlin. Between 1949 and 1961, 2.5 million East Germans immigrated to West Germany to seek democratic refuge through Berlin, damaging East Germany's economy. The Soviets' last attempt to save their economy was building a barrier to prevent further emigration. On August 13, 1961, the Berlin Wall was built by the Soviets to seal their borders while they explored new ways to expand their empire.
President Kennedy said, "It's not a very nice solution, but a wall is a hell of a lot better than a war." The United States did not intervene due to the threat of initiating a conflict that would cost many lives. However, there were attempts to help the victims of East Berlin. The Transit Agreement of 1972 secured the right of East Berliners to cross into West Berlin in cases of family emergencies. This led the way for the Basic Treaty in 1973, where East Germany and West Germany recognized each other as sovereign and independent countries. The countries also agreed to the exchange of permanent missions in Bonn of West Germany and East Berlin to further relations. West Germany sent its first representative in 1974, but formal diplomatic relations were never established. In 1975, construction for Border Wall 75 began. This wall was larger and stronger, and East German authorities increased security measures. Then, in 1985, new Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev came into power. President Reagan realized the revolutionary goals Gorbachev had for the Soviet Union and took advantage of the opportunity to open relations. In 1987, he gave a speech at the Brandenburg Gate.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate.
Mikhail Gorbachev had a different idea for the Soviet Union in mind. He introduced the policies of glasnost and perestroika to the Soviet Union. Glasnost, or openness, was open discussion of political and social issues. Perestroika, meaning listen, was a political movement for reformation within the Communist Party. These policies began the democratization of the Soviet Union and the end of communist control.
Mikhail Gorbachev in October came to East Berlin and he told the East German government, he used these words, "Those who come too late are punished by history. Those who come too late are punished by history." And what he was saying, and this was on the 40th anniversary of East Germany's existence, what he was saying is to the East German government, you've got to catch up, guys. You've got to recognize that you can't rule in the same way that you've been ruling in the past.
Despite the Soviets' past military presence in Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia, Polish voters elected a non-communist government, and Gorbachev did not act. Eastern European dictatorships then began to fall one by one. Communist regimes were expelled from Hungary and Czechoslovakia. The demand for freedom spread farther. The Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania declared independence. Soon calls for independence were heard inside the Soviet Union. Gorbachev attempted to stop the revolutions, but the public was no longer behind him. Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia declared their independence, and the Soviet Union was officially dissolved.
On November 9, 1989, the spokesman for East Berlin's Communist Party announced that at midnight, people in East Berlin would be allowed to cross freely into the West. Thousands of East Berliners went to the border, and there was a celebration described as the greatest street party in the history of the world. Richard Pinnard, who had been living in East Germany, said, "An overwhelming feeling of relief, of joy, of unreality filled one that this monster was dead and people had conquered it." The official reunification of East and West Germany was on October 3, 1990. The end of the wall symbolized an end to the Cold War era, the fall of communist control over Europe, and the destruction of the Iron Curtain. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union used Berlin and East Germany to explore new ways to expand their communist empire. They established communist governments in the new independent countries of Eastern Europe to build their Iron Curtain. The United States explored and experimented with the right amount of isolationism and involvement in Europe. And although they never acted on the wall, they kept a military presence there as a safeguard of democracy in the West. Rather than coming to an agreement, they relied on military threats to achieve their political goals. The lack of successful exchange and communications with each other during the war prevented peaceful compromises from being reached. The United States joined NATO while the Soviet Union joined the Warsaw Pact. They formed alliances with other countries that held their same political views. Two completely different types of governments were encountered in West and East Germany, leading to very different lives and experiences. Today, the remains of the Berlin Wall are a triumphant symbol of the defeat of the Communist Revolution in Europe, and prove that the ideals of democracy will prevail even when tested and challenged.